Hello, folks, and welcome to our big Readiness session. In terms of meeting stuff, we're going to be nice and tight within an hour, so we'll be quite punchy with that. There are some small slots for questions throughout. People, please use the chat if you want to raise questions. There's three of us presenting on and off, so all of us will pick up something if necessary. We are going to write up a blog after this. It's already partly written in the material I've put out so far, and we'll share the recording. We'll clean up and share the recording with everybody. So that's where we are. In terms of agenda, we'll spend a few minutes on introductions, just briefly introducing who the presenters are. I'll spend a few minutes just positioning this. I think I've done that in blogs anyway, but I'll just redo it. Becca will then kindly talk to us about applied curiosity, that an approach we can engage people in a sensible way. I'll let her introduce that properly. We'll include some question time at the back end of that for Becca too. And then the core session, this could expand to as much time as we wanted to be honest. But Chris has kindly prepped a walkthrough of the principles-based readiness model he's put together. I'm not here to showcase at all necessarily. We're just here to discuss a process to engage people to think about improving strategy delivery and all that surrounds it. 5 minutes on wrap up, and then we'll have time for questions if anyone has any time before their afternoon day. So moving swiftly on then, I'll keep me brief. I'm David. I've started this business integrated governance stuff. My LinkedIn profile's there. One of the companies I work for is there. I'm just very keen to publicize what business integrated governance is, to make as many connections with professional people to make it better, and to orientate it to other aspects of our business lives. So that's me.
So yeah, hi, I'm Becca Prideaux. I'm a leadership development and change management consultant, and my business is The Curious Choice. So I work with large organizations and projects around their change program. And why this is exciting for me is that when we apply curiosity to how we work with people, we can bring these tools to life in a meaningful way for them and their businesses. So that's me.
I'm very glad Becca could join us, because I think this sensitivity around engagement is vital, and Becca's got a great way of putting it, and hope that's of interest. And Chris, please again introduce yourself too.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a long history in implementing change strategy in various ways, and obviously things like projects and PMOs and strategy execution officers. Actually coined that SXO term back in 2006, 2007, and was presenting on that and the need to integrate strategy, governance, performance with PMOs, project portfolio management, etc., PMI conferences, etc., way back then. So a lot of history in helping people implement strategic performance management, cascade the governance and review of that across the organization and down. And in all of that, whether we're talking about governance in projects and portfolios, or whether we're talking about that governance across the whole organization in terms of making sure that we get strategy changes made in the face of day-to-day pressures and firefighting, that's a governance issue. And that's where a lot of my experience in the last 20, 25 years has been. So very happy to be here today to help talk about some of that.
I must say, Chris has put an awful amount of effort into putting the model together, and it's very much appreciated, Chris. And it's not finished. It's not as rich and wonderful as you'd like it to be, but it's pretty good. And thank you for sharing. As we'll see in a bit. Okay, a bit of preamble. Just to explain. So I guess if any of us are looking to do any significant change, we'll want to do that in a sensible way. If we're doing micro change, we might install a system and define requirements and build something and change process, and we'll dive straight into requirements and not really worry too much around what everyone thinks about whether there's actually consensus to do something. But if we're looking to do something as sophisticated as integrated governance and try to improve strategy delivery, which goes across our organizations, and there's a lot more people we need to engage, and we need to engage senior people. So we have this section in the big body of knowledge. We call it the big journey, which talks about basically a change management approach, which hopefully enables us to avoid a fight from having decided we're going to do something and then not engage people on the problems, and then find that there's no support for what we've tried to do because we've not engaged people. So in the body of knowledge, we refer to this word nemawashi, working around the roots. First coined, I think it's a Toyota phrase, from how they do change through manufacturing, but it's about building consensus of a need to do something. Whatever it is, just getting people on board with the opportunities and threats that you're facing and the wish to do something, and then thinking about doing that sensibly in a way that can be achieved by the organization. So we in the big framework, we go into this quite a bit, and we're very keen to try and help people get off the ground, to take these concepts and ideas and help their organizations turn them into something. And how do we do that? Well, everyone can have their own view on this, but what we've written about is an approach that firstly enables us as people who might want to leverage big to understand who we are. What do I think the problem or opportunity is, and also recognize where I sit in the organization with respect to my ability to control or influence change. And I think that self-recognition is really important before we go anywhere, because we might waste a lot of time and cause a lot of fuss and damage ourselves professionally if we're a bit careless about how we kick things off. Clearly, again, maybe this is teaching granite to suck eggs. We need to understand who our stakeholders are, who are our senior stakeholders, who are our peers, who can we control, who do we have to influence, and who are those people, and which parts of the organization can we engage with, and do we need to engage with to improve strategy delivery and all that surrounds it. I guess if we know what we think the problem is and what the opportunity is, and understand who we might need to influence, we need to understand our situation. Not just what are the problems and opportunities that the people face, but who are the right people to engage with. Is there a certain trigger scenario that we can leverage to get on the back of other people's interest? Is the timing right for talking about improving strategy delivery? And can we understand our stakeholders and their attitude to this? Some people may be ambivalent, others really just not interested, and there might be all kinds of scenarios going on. We then talk about, well, okay, if I understand why I'm doing this, and I understand who I need to influence, and I understand what those people think, perhaps it's now time to gather a bit more evidence. And this is the purpose of the session today. We'll offer you a principles-based readiness assessment. There's a bit more to it than that, but it'll help for people that are here and listening and watching afterwards. That will offer a model which helps people capture a bit of current state. Not all of it, not in great depth, but certainly there's something to play with, and you might find it useful. Who knows? Because then if we've gathered our understanding of current states, if we understand appetite to change, we can then think about what next. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in the big framework which talks about more first steps, building components, driving change, and looking to sustain a better future integrated strategy delivery framework. So that's the background, that's the preamble. And I guess the most important part to a lot of this, and the way we communicate and engage with people, is engaging with people. So Becca, is that a good enough intro for applied curiosity?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, David. So we all know intuitively that without people, our projects don't work. And applied curiosity is something, curiosity is something I'm hearing people talk more and more about in the corporate world, and how we all value curiosity. And why is that? What impact can it make? So just a very quick whiz through of some things. And if you want to know more, catch me later on this. I can talk for the whole hour on it, but I'm not going to, because we've got lots of brilliant stuff to come. So it is all about building trust and psychological safety in our relationships. Without that, everything around our projects and programs slows down. And as David alluded to earlier, as we build that trust, as we approach conversations with curiosity as opposed to with an agenda, we are able to take the risk personally and for the organization out. Whether you're an employee, whether you're a consultant, whether you are somebody working at a senior level or a junior level, bringing up change can feel risky, and let's make it as unrisky as possible, because that's where we get a lot of other benefits. And particularly if we're bringing up something that we know somebody in the organization is passionate about, and we maybe don't agree with them, because that happens. So it's a great way of engaging and working with our stakeholders, understanding their agendas, making sure they feel understood. And brilliant as we all are, we have to admit that sometimes we don't know all the facts. So it is a great way of checking our own understanding as well. If we then look beyond the organization, the world that we're operating in is changing really, really rapidly. We need to make sure we're keeping that relevant, and we're keeping ourselves relevant in our organizations. We want to be making the best decisions we can in these rapidly changing and uncertain times. And we want to make sure that we're really leveraging all the people in our business. And we do that by lessening our own internal biases and the assumptions we make through curiosity. There's lots of data around how it improves innovation and performance as well. I'm not going to go into that today, but if I could have the next slide, please, David. So what is the applied curiosity model? Well, it on the surface looks wonderfully straightforward, and it kind of is. But what I've noticed is that where we talk about curiosity, we get curious, but we don't always do something with it. So this is a process that we can use as an iterative virtuous circle to make sure we're really using and applying that curiosity. So I'm going to start at the top, although you could start anywhere, with research. So that's where we go out and we find facts, we gather information from ourselves, maybe from other people, maybe by reading, maybe by attending things like today and learning about things. What we then need to do, and in the fast pace of a job or a project or a program, this is really hard to do. We need to press pause and reflect on what we found. What have we learned? What does it mean? How does it fit with everything else? And then we need to go on and plan. We need to react to what we found and make our plan. We've come up with a hypothesis during our reflection stage. We then need to go and test it. That throws out more research, and you can see how we're flying around the loop. Next stage, please. Next slide, please, David. So what does that mean for using with BIG and with the readiness model in particular? So it's a way of collating what we already know, pulling everything together in that research phase. We can use that research phase and the reflect phase to engage our stakeholders and check our understanding and hypotheses. We can use it iteratively when we're going through the readiness model, and you'll see when we come to Chris's session, lots of opportunities to really challenge and apply your curiosity. We can then, when we've gone through the readiness piece and we're ready to go on, or when we're planning how we're going to implement our readiness assessment, we can use curiosity to guide our planning. We can then use it as we're going through the planning, as we're going through our plans and implementing, to make sure we stay on track. we can use it to make sure we learn lessons. I'm sure all of us have been in projects and programs where you think, yeah, I should have known that before. It's usually because we haven't taken that time to pause and reflect after something's happened and build it into our body of knowledge. So it's a great way of keeping the body of knowledge around BIG alive, and any project, program, thing that you implement in your organization. It's a great way of keeping it relevant going forward. Next slide, please. This feels very great having somebody else moving the slides for me. So I just want to very, very quickly cover two absolutely key skills that we maybe think we're great at, but we can always be better at when it comes to implementing our curiosity. The first one is listening, and we quite often are taught about active listening, but actually we need to break it down a little bit more than that, because you're not always listening with curiosity at that point. So this staircase, various bits of it may feel familiar. If you've got teenagers, you've probably been on the left-hand side of this model where you're talking away, they're in the same room and you know they're not listening at all, and not calling out any names, but if you're listening to this with AI, an agent afterwards, or maybe you're doing your emails while you're listening to us talk, I would suggest that maybe you're either ignoring, or maybe at the next stage, potentially. The next stage up listening wise is pretending to listen, and that's where you're listening for the pause in the conversation so you can say something. Again, you're not taking in information, you're just listening for that so you can then get in and say what you need to say. Up from that, we have what's called selective listening, and that's where you're listening with a little bit more engagement of your brain. You are processing the information that's being said, but you're listening to disagree. And I think for those of us on the call who are consultants or who've been subject matter experts, where your job and your role has been to provide expertise, quite often we're unconsciously trained to selectively listen. You're listening to a conversation to show them what they don't know yet. That's great, but that's not curiosity, and that has a role. All of these have a role. Where we need to be listening if we're applying curiosity is at attentive listening, and that's where we're listening with the intent to understand. We're asking those reflective questions, we're playing back what's been said, we're checking and hopefully expanding our understanding, and potentially the understanding of the person we're talking to as well. Which leads us on to the top level, which is empathetic listening, which is where you're so in the other person's perspective, so listening from their frame of reference that it feels very empathetic for them. Now, when we're looking at the readiness model, when we're looking at applying our curiosity, we need to at least be at attentive listening. And sometimes, and with our very senior stakeholders, trying to get into that empathetic listening zone will really help us unlock those conversations. I'm not advocating that you spend all your time listening like that. It is exhausting. So it's knowing when to move up and down the ladder, but making sure you're at the right level for the conversation that you're having. Hopefully that all makes sense. And I've got one more thing I want to run through with you from a skills perspective, and that's about asking better questions. We know to be able to listen, we need to be able to ask questions. And when you talk to a lot of people about curiosity, they say being curious is all about the questions. Well, yes, and there's more we need to do with it. So what do I mean by a better question? Well, we probably know about open and closed questions, the ones that stop you just answering yes and no. Again, they have a place. They're not what we want here. And it's the intent behind your question that informs how you ask the question. So we're looking for not just a question that gets somebody talking, not just a question that gets them thinking. What we're looking for when we're applying our curiosity is combining both of those with our own intent to learn what they've got to share with us. So very quickly on question structures, who, what, when, where, how, great ways to open a question. Tell me more. I know technically it's not a question, but it's great for pulling out that information. And the big watch out, the one we often get wrong as it's what we want to know. We want to know why somebody thinks that. But if you think of the difference, if I say to you, why did you do that? Versus tell me about your approach. Take me through your thinking process. Asking me why directly puts me very defensive, and it closes the other person's mind down. They get into justification, and so we don't learn what we're trying to learn. 3 very, very, very common mistakes that happen with questions. I suspect you all know these and are not falling into them, but this is one of those. I want to make sure everybody knows them because it makes a really big difference. Leading questions. It's very easy to ask questions where it's obvious what answer we want to get. Do we think we should be doing a big readiness assessment? A, it's a closed question, and B, it's really obvious what we think. the question cannon, where you ask 3 or 4 questions in rapid succession. Do you think this, about that, about this? The person then doesn't know which one to answer first, and you probably won't get the information. So pick one, wait, then go to another one. But also questions that unexpectedly change the subject or the train of thought that somebody's on. So follow their thought and then come back to your one later. If I'm asking you lots of questions about the big readiness assessment, then suddenly ask you about the weather, it's going to close your brain down totally, and that's not what we're looking to achieve. So very quick run through there of some key skills, and if I could have the next slide, please. We're going to give you an opportunity as we go through Chris's session to think about how you could use applied curiosity in each of the things that he's going to show you. You're going to be using research as you pull together an initial fact base. You're going to need to reflect on that. Almost certainly not going to have time to do that or even complete the fact base initially. And then you're going to need to decide what steps to take. So if we go back to the model that David showed us straight up, which I think is the next slide, please, David. What you're going to be doing as you go through each of these 5 stages is using the whole applied curiosity cycle before you move on to the next one. And you're using it overall, because if you look from 1 to 3, you're looking at particularly about research. The reflection jointly comes at stage 4, and the reaction is the what next, but you're going to use it multiple times through that. So having teased and trailed about Chris's wonderful session, I think we've got a quick pause for questions. And then moving on. So David, back to you to manage that. I saw something pop up in the chat. I haven't had a chance to have a look.
Yeah, Adrian's comment, and I think folks, everyone has access to speak if they wish to. But again, please respect the time we've got available, but you can speak if you want to. Adrian was reflecting about some stakeholders not being able to be managed, not being able to be engaged because they're just not interested, just have to be managed, and I guess their impact on things coped with. But what I'm hearing, Becca, is that what you're almost providing here is a style of engagement that has very low threat and is very conducive to people trusting you to speak with you and to tease out the opportunities and threats that they see.
Absolutely. And I think I suspect, Adrian, we've all been there with that stakeholder who really doesn't want to engage. And generally I use curiosity 2 ways then. It's to try and figure out what their opposition is, to really understand their agenda, but also to find out how I can move around them and who else can influence them, who do they trust. So a lot of self-reflection on, what do I already know about them? What do I know about their influence circles in the organization? Who else might be able to help me get through to them? What do we know about their opposition? But also, what can I get to talk to them about that then maybe can be a stepping stone to build that trust to then do it. And the very quick technique that quite often works, particularly well if you're an external or if you're brave enough to, is I use something called the jester's license, which is, if you think about the ancient kings, they had a jester who was there to ask them stupid questions. So I will signal the fact that, hey, I'd like to use my jester's license here and ask you what's a really stupid, obvious, dumb question, but I'm really curious to know what you have to say. Can you tell me about, or what's happening with, and then go in with something so, not as basic as what's your opposition, but get them talking about the topic, about how, what's your perspective on how well governance is working, for example, so that you said this is a silly question, and I know you know the answer, so it's safe to talk to me. It just can unlock it sometimes a little bit as well.
Certainly to me, that probing this strategy to delivery space and whether an organization's effectively set up to manage strategy delivery, it feels like a very sensitive area, and having a questioning and an engaging approach, I think, is the only way to get conversations started. So I think it's really important that you sort of outline this for everyone, Becca. Anyone else got any final points before we move on? Because we do need to move on. We'll have time at the end. So, Chris, I think it's back to you, isn't it? It's your piece. So, drive me. Chris will share his screen, but will drive me to run slides as he wishes. Just a little bit of background, very briefly. If people want to, I've shared emails, but the content and the tool that Chris is going to show is available to everyone to log into and download this story with. And you're very welcome to try it for yourselves away from here. But Chris, I'll just shut up and leave the floor to you, shall I?
Okay. I think we've got, so we've got this slide. Let me just start here. So I think, as Becca has been emphasizing, and as I think probably all of us are well aware of, is that if we're going to implement something like integrated governance, which means it must be at least spanning 2 kind of accountability nodes, otherwise we're not dealing with integration in a way. That means we're going to have to get at least 2 key stakeholders, accountable people, to agree on how they're going to work together to improve their decision-making in the organization. And of course, if we're trying to do this across the organization, that means there are going to be lots more people that we need to get involved. And how do we get those people involved, and how do we keep them involved? So this is a complicated environment, typically. There's lots of moving parts. It's also a complex environment because those moving parts are dynamic. And we're talking about groups of people, and that is inherently unpredictable. So we have to stay on top of it as well. And so a big part of what I'm talking about is finding ways that you can visually help keep people, first, to understand it and come on board, but secondly, to keep track of it and to keep on top of this engagement as we go along. And we know we need the people to do this. If we don't get the people, it is not going to happen. You know, I've spent 30 years in IT in a past life before we started with strategy and things like that. And there were definitely systems we implemented that never got used. Yeah, and only one reason: we didn't engage stakeholders properly. If we had, we would never have built some of those systems, and we would have built others slightly differently, and we would have done change management differently, and they wouldn't have been wasted. So, yeah, so what we want to do is step through and have a way that we can talk to these people and show them what it is we're trying to do. And we need to be able to work out what the scope is that we're working on. So what units, accountability nodes, what parts of governance should we try and address, and what stage or phase? Who's accountable in these, so that we know who to include and who to engage? And maybe so we can actually think about who is it that's accountable, because quite often until we stop and really think about it, we've actually got assumptions, and they may not hold up when we look at it in detail, especially for parts of the organization we're not that familiar with. And then we have to think about, if we're going to implement this integrated governance, what do we need to do there? What are the components that make up a good process for doing this integrated governance and keeping it going? And so we need to think about, what components do we already have? And so we want a way just to think about this and to talk to other people and then record those and understand what we think we already have and what we think we don't have, and things in between on that continuum about what needs to be improved or fixed or tweaked, for example. And having thought about that, we then want to think about the big principles, these 14 principles that give us a guide as to whether we are doing integrated governance well or not. And so we can then talk about these principles and use a visual model again to talk about, discuss it, and get people to think about, how mature are we? How well are we covering these principles? And having done that, we can then think about these accountable people we've identified and where do they stand in terms of this. So how did they respond? What's their attitude? How much influence do they have? The standard kind of stakeholder engagement questions. And of course, you can modify those to suit your situation as needed. Okay, David, I think I can go to my screen now, right? Let's go to the next slide first before I start then.
I think you can share at any time, Chris. Just grab the screen.
Yeah, okay. I will share. Let me just talk to this quickly first. So we've set up this model in Sharp Cloud. Sharp Cloud is a tool that I've found very effective for visualizing these kind of things where we need to combine complexity but be able to come out to a simple view and dive into deep detail if we want to. And the key to that is it allows you to build relationships between different things in your organization, stakeholders, principles, components, processes, action steps, or anything else, and to characterize those relationships and build them into the database. And that means I can do calculations. For example, I can see how many stakeholders are engaged with this particular principle, for example, and I could gauge that by putting attributes. These ones are well engaged, these ones are not so well engaged, and I can use calculations. And wherever I build those relationships, I can always use them on any other view because they're in the database. So it means we have a rich way to visualize at a high level what's going on. First, to get people engaged and help them understand what we're talking about and get engaged and get involved. And secondly, to illustrate complexity at a high level where we need, drill down into the detail where we need, but all in one visual model. And thirdly, to keep track of stuff. And it doesn't have to be Sharp Cloud. There are other tools that can help you do that, right? I've done this in there because I find it effective and useful. And in this first view, what we're trying to do is to work out what kind of accountability structure. So what org structure do we have and who's accountable for each of those units or nodes within the organization? And to what degree does that governance and decision-making integrate across those different units? And so into this view, we've built some domains, and the domains are simply there because typically we'll find that there's like a PMO that has one set of governors, for example, across projects, etc., and some pattern and process that's in there. And then we've got things like business as usual type places, a factory or service or unit or something like that, where they have different governance structures, perhaps, that might be more around financial or sales decisions or something like that, but may not reflect the same nature of governance that we have in the project side. And so the idea of the domains here is to start a discussion about what differences we've got and do we have integration between these different types of governance or don't we? And that's the key to this. And the idea of it is I've got some visual model where I can capture whatever is done in whatever detail I like as we go. So I'm self-documenting as we go, but it gives me a way to talk to other people to get them together and facilitate a discussion. Okay, I'll share my screen at this point. If people have questions, please shout.
Well,
Okay.
while you're getting there, Chris, well, that's just appearing on screen. The observation for me is that what I think this show is not just another way to draw an org chart. It's actually a lot more about accountability and where accountability flows and how dependencies work. A key aspect to managing integrating decisions and all that's related to strategy delivery is about understanding how information flows around accountability, and I think that structure is capturing that. And I've not seen many organisations that can map out their accountabilities. I see lots of people who draw an org chart, but not many who really map out how accountability flows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's key, that having a reporting structure, we think that's possibly reflecting accountability. Quite often it's not the full story and not necessarily correct. So
do I need to give you some, sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
Do I need to give you some permission? Is there a...
You should be seeing my screen.
No.
No? I am sharing it.
I'll stop sharing mine just to make sure.
I'm good.
I can see it.
Ah, yeah, you need to stop sharing yours, I think, David.
We can see it though, Chris.
Okay.
Ooh.
So, okay, good. You can all see it now?
Apart from me, but carry on. I'm not the important one.
Okay, good. So, and David, just stop me at the right time, right? So in this model that I've built, which is a very simple model, and of course, if you want to do more than this and include some of the sort of details, please talk to me and I can help you with that. So as David says, so we've got here some default departments or units and an accountable owner. The relationship here, if we look at it, we're saying these are accountable people for that unit. And of course, we could add in here and say, for example, that the product owner is now accountable to the CEO. Okay. And in this way, we can start thinking about who is actually accountable for these things. And then depending on the domains that we have here, so product, service, manager, different colored blocks, we can decide whether this services is, we want to deal with it in product services, or to us, that's just business as usual. And we can drag and drop these people, and there are attributes associated with them, which we can show in here. And one of those is the domain. And by dragging and dropping it visually, you can then have it take on that attribute value. And that just means that when you are talking to people, maybe a group of people or an individual, you can use this picture and you can then update it as you go. In addition, what we're doing in here is getting people to think about where do they sit in this? And so we've added an attribute to say, well, is this my node or isn't it? Is this where I sit in the organization? And the idea of that is to get people thinking about where they are and who else are they going to have to deal with? How do they fit within this? What does the governance look like? And of course, we want them to ask themselves, is the governance here, products and service management, the same as the governance we see in BAU? How does the finance affect this? What about internal audit? What about the PMO? Where does the governance sit here? Does it work well? Is it integrated? Who would we need to talk to get it integrated? So it's not just building an organization chart, as David has said, it's really about building a picture of different accountability nodes or points of governance within the organization. And we use the domains here, not because those are always what we're going to use, but just because it's a good place to start and thinking there might be differences and gaps in our governance as we go from one domain to another. And we also want to think about, if we've got governance across all of these and we're getting that integrated decision-making across it, how do we keep that working? How do we support all of these accountable people in getting that information they need, in making sure that there is integrated governance, that they are getting the information they need from other units within the organization, and that they get that information on a timely basis. Someone needs to keep all of this process up to date, administered, and make sure it's working. So we also need to think about how we're going to service and administer this governance across the organization. So do we expand the PMO into something like Strategy Execution Office or a governance office where we've got unified governance across the organization? Do we have to put a new organization in? What would that look like? How will we support individual units from that, etc.? Okay.
Chris, you asked me to keep an eye on the time for you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be irritating and
I
say
was just, we're right on schedule. I was just going to move to the next one. Thank you. So, having thought about that, the next question really is, let's think about these big components. And what we've done here is put a summary item. So strategy information model. If we're going to do integrated governance, we really need to understand what a strategy is, what our objectives are, how are we trying to move everything across the organization to achieve that strategy. And that strategy information model says, okay, there's lots of things that we need. We need to understand the hierarchy. We need any documents about that. We need concepts and definition, alignments, measures, all of those things clearly available to us. And we would say that is our strategy information model. And so do we have that or don't we have that? Do we have just the hierarchy but not the object model, for example? And then the idea was to get people thinking about this, just to say, well, if I look at that particular component, where do we sit on that? Is it fit for purpose? Do we need to improve it? Does it not exist at all? So we can decide, oh, we don't have that, right? And this is something which we can obviously discuss, because we can put the screen up, we can give it to people asynchronously and say, please have a look at this over the next week and do what you want with it and reflect what you think. So it's a visual tool just to help us get things on board. And I've found that having this kind of tool makes it an awful lot easier to get people to understand. Where I've had to use, for example, multiple PowerPoints trying to explain all these different concepts, it really has become quite difficult. So where we have these complicated things, it really helps to have simple visual models that are nevertheless linked. So we can go from one to the other and show the dependencies as well. Okay, so the idea here is to go through these various components of BIG and decide and think about, really, where are we, talk to other people, get a feel for to what extent do we have these in place, and would we want to fix these for our own interpretation or implementation of integrated governance. So we've got the strategy piece, we've got key big components, 8 of them, so through organization, accountability to business support. And then we've got some enablers, both tools, so things like a PMIS or PPM system, for example, or a racing model or something like that, and processes that support that. So do we have these in place, and to what extent could we use those for integrated governance, or are they already helping to give us integrated governance, and we can then assess them accordingly. Of course, this is a high level, and to get answers, you're going to go in detail with various people and probably drill down into more detail. And you can then add those details to this visual model and have them roll up into this higher level one and have them all in one place. Okay, and once we've given that some thought, perhaps we've now got a better idea of where we are in relation to the existence of integrated governance within our organization and how well it's working. we can think about this big readiness model, which is, if you like, a sort of maturity model, where we're going to look at these 14 principles and then decide to what degree do we currently meet these. Again, this is at high level, but it's a visual tool to try and get people on board thinking about this. And if we want to do something practical with this, we're going to drill this down to individual accountability nodes or units, and probably look at things in more detail along with those kind of components thinking, and then come up with some more detailed things, which again, we can then roll up into high-level assessment. We've added some content in here, which gives you more idea about what the principle is. So principle 6, there's an integrated governance framework, which enables strategy execution, prioritizing between balanced run the business type things, change and value generation objectives and activity. So do we have a governance framework that does that across the organization, or don't we? And we can then think about whether we meet that partially or we meet it fully. And if we meet it partially, do we do that across all the units that we're looking at within the scope of our big implementation, or only through some of them? So partially or fully is about how many units we currently cover that with, and adequately or inadequately is about how well we meet this principle or not. So it's a fairly generic assessment at this high level. Of course, you can then expand this down and do this in much more detailed form. And there is another form of this assessment which gives much more detail. So a lot more sub-principles, if you want, to go along with this, which you can then combine. And we can do that the same way in a visual approach, just like this. Okay, and then the idea here is that you can sit and talk with people in a group or individual stakeholders and say, okay, where do we think we sit on this? Is it partially met? So some units are doing this, others are not. And if they are, is it done adequately or not so well? And we can then decide on that, and we can drag and drop it, and we can then see immediately where we think we sit with any of these, and that can help us decide where to start and what we really need to do, and have a discussion about the scope and the extent of any integrated governance and the likely benefits that come from them. And having done that, we can then go and see about who are those stakeholders that will come up. So in the tray at the top here, we have all the stakeholders that we came up with and updated, etc., from this stakeholder map or accountability map, if you like. It's the same data. These would have been updated accordingly. And the idea here is that we want to look at, and we can do more than these three. So we've got influence on the vertical axis, we've got interest on the horizontal axis, and we've got an attitude attribute that we can assign. And we can say, well, where does the CIO sit on this? And we've had discussions talking with these people about the accountability map and about the readiness and the components, etc. And we can work with that and listen to them and see where they are. Maybe we've done some detailed interviews with them, and we can decide where they sit within this. So we saw a little, maybe the CIO doesn't have that much influence in this, but they had quite a high interest. And we can then go and look at this. Sorry. And we can go and look at this and decide what is their attitude. And we've found that they are definitely in favor of this, and they'd like to get things like the data and the information and help us get that set up properly for integrated governance. And we can then reflect their attitude. If we want to, we can also add another attribute to this, for example, and we could make the size of this item linked to that. So on this one chart, we can get quite a lot of information. And we can just drag and drop these people appropriately to give us an idea of where they sit within this. Okay. And of course, how are we going to get these people engaged? And as Adrian was saying earlier, we sometimes find people who are unwilling to be engaged, and then we have to find a way, right? Maybe it's we don't have the power to twist that or to put the right things in place, but then we have to find another stakeholder, the CEO or someone else who does have that and can then help get them on board. Or you find another way, as I'm sure all of us at times have had to do, and just, you know, you get to the workshop and the boss just doesn't want to participate, and then you have to sit him down and get him to find a way to get him or her to participate, because otherwise you've got a day of workshops wasted with everybody sitting around doing nothing. And so you've got to find that way to get them at least on board. Okay. The rest of this is saying, we get through this, we work in detail through these people, get that going, work out the scope, see what principles, components we need, and then we want to put that all into a visual map that can help us explain what is a complicated thing to people. And that map should not only capture all the documentation and the steps along the way, right, but should also enable us to follow the implementation and update it as we go, plan versus actual, etc., so that we don't lose any of the benefits, the documentation. It's all in one place for everybody to see. And of course, to get all of this done, we really want to be applying this applied curiosity that Becca has been talking about, to get people on board, to get them engaged, to get them to take part, and to learn from them about many things we probably don't know about, even though we think we do, and to make sure we've catered for those in our plan. And to do all of that, we're going to have had some sponsor in there to allow us to go and talk to all these people and take their time up and put forward proposals for things. We're not going to get that without some senior sponsorship.
Chris, in respect of time, I think we should move on to wrapping up. As I said at the start, there's loads. We could spend 2 hours on this. And what Chris is presenting is a specific model. The big CIC with respect to models is sort of technology and vendor agnostic. But what we're showing here, I guess, is a way, a tool to engage people. You can take or and use as you see fit, or use your own PowerPoints. But what the value of this is, it's doing that presentation layer with keeping all the data in something that you can play with as you extend and build the model.
Yeah.
And an example of that extension here, Chris, is kind of showing we can get to like a roadmap for this capability as an extension of that.
Yeah.
But shall I move on just to wrap up, Chris?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
And I'll try.
Yeah.
And
just to add that if anybody has questions or want to talk about this more from whatever perspective, I am available, and my contacts are there in the presentation, I think. So,
but there's so much more you can do with this, isn't there, Chris? And we've just come up with a simple example, just to whet the appetite, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where are we? If people watching this are a protagonist to improve, can people see my screen? Is it displayed? Hopefully it should be. Can you see that my screen okay? Okay, so if you're the protagonist, if you're somebody that's looking to improve the connection of strategy to delivery, then I guess what we're illustrating here is that we can help you model which parts of the organization to involve and to get people thinking about what's concerned. We can help you build consensus on the principles by discussing them openly and getting agreement as to whether we fulfill them or not. That's really good discussion to help us understand where we have consensus and when we have difference. We can then move to think about, well, what are the building blocks we need to deliver on these principles? What do we have to build, and who has to build them, and what do we have that's existing? What don't we have? And I guess the last piece Chris showed was engaging our stakeholders about mapping the time we have to spend with them to bring them on board and apply our curiosity and our influence as best we can see fit. We're looking also then at the model. So we've gone through that I'm a potential protagonist. I've thought about my stakeholders. I understand the situation. I'm sensitive to where I am and who I've got to influence. We've used a model like we've shown to engage others and to build consensus. So then perhaps we can talk about what next. And I can't go into that in any great depth here because we haven't got so much time. But again, in the big framework, and Chris mentioned it on his last page, a life cycle might follow. We've talked about essentially first steps and getting consensus on the need. Discovery, of course, many of us will understand is, well, what do we have? What's the vision? What we're going to build in what sequence? The build is actually getting the components and capabilities in place and making that happen. Adopt is changing minds and behaviors. And sustain, again, we can be curious about how to take this forwards and keep moving and achieving value with it. There's all kinds of stuff that underpins this. There's business change, there's technology to make it easier for us, there's integration that we need to ensure. And as everyone will probably realize, there's scope, there's an iterative approach, a roadmap to tackle this. And we're certainly not building Rome in a day. And a big journey explains an approach to this. And you can read more. There's a link on these slides, which I'll share. So I think pretty much we've done. We can now open up for more questions we've had on the chat. I'll leave this on screen to remind everyone of the contact details if needs be. But what next? Well, please be our guest to download, to create an account with Shark Cloud, or create your PowerPoints, whichever way it is, but do something. The big story that Chris just walked through, you can download that, and I think I've shared it with people. So if you'd like to give it a try, do. And if you'd like some help with that, give Chris a shout. The links, Becca's email is there if you want to know more about applied curiosity. But that's what we wanted to get over in the big readiness session. Have I missed anything, Becca and Chris?